Well, I'd like to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights to help guide you along your healing journey. Together, we'll explore the hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings inside grief that can empower you to reclaim your life and create an inspiring future. Today, I have an awesome guest with us today. You guys are really going to enjoy this episode. I have Maddison Sutton with us. She's a certified integrative health and wellness coach and a functional diagnostics and nutritional practitioner dedicated to helping women take control of their health. After over a decade in the corporate world, she saw firsthand the toll of chronic stress and following her father's mesothelioma diagnosis turned to holistic healing. Now she specializes in stress management, hormone health, and preconception wellness, empowering busy women to restore balance, boost energy, and build confidence. Her mission is to help women align their health with their ambitions and take proactive control of their well-being. So without further ado, Madison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, I was really inspired by your story when we first talked. You shared a lot about anticipatory grief, and that was something I hadn't really jumped into because I don't hear about it much. So I'm really looking forward to you sharing that aspect of things. But I want to just start off by giving you the floor to share your story about your father getting cancer and how that took you on this path of grief and healing to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I also did not know about anticipatory grief or I'd never heard the term anticipatory grief until actually after my father passed. My friends gave me a book, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a term for this. I was actually going through something before my father even passed. Um, so I guess to kind of back up, it's really funny how things work out. I was living in San Francisco a few months prior to my father passing. I thought I was going to stay out there forever, and something just like really called me to move home. And so much has happened. So much happened in that short window between me moving home and my father passing. And I don't think that you and I talked about that when we spoke earlier, but there were a few other people in my family that passed. My stepmom's father passed kind of suddenly. My grandma, my father's mom, was diagnosed with cancer. And a little bit of good news, I ended up meeting my current partner. So felt very interesting that I was called to come home. And about 2 weeks after my grandma was diagnosed with cancer, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And he, yeah, I know it was really tough. I was like, is cancer contagious? I was like, surely he doesn't have cancer. I was like, there's just no way that both these people, like my dad and his mom, have been diagnosed with cancer at the same time. And we actually never even told her that he had cancer just because we knew she was going to go quickly and we didn't want her to deal with that. But when my father was diagnosed, I did not know what mesothelioma was. I'd never heard of it. Turns out it's pretty bad. It's one of those cancers that most people believe cannot be overcome. And the life expectancy or the timeline is for most people is around 18 months to 3 years. My dad did end up passing within 18 months. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So we were really thinking that it would be a much longer time period because he was young. Most people that get mesothelioma are much older. It takes about 40 years for mesothelioma to actually develop. And it comes from asbestos exposure, which kind of made sense with his line of work. So it was a tough time. My father, kind of stubborn man that he was, didn't want to change much about his life. That was really difficult for me, being a holistic somebody that was so passionate about holistic healing and holistic wellness. That was something that I very much had to learn during my grief journey and just watching my father be sick, that even though I thought he should be handling it a certain way, didn't mean that he was going to handle it that way. It was his cancer, it was his sickness, but that really took a toll on me. I was in the corporate space when he was diagnosed. Again, I'd always been really passionate about holistic health and wellness. I made the decision very soon after he was diagnosed to actually leave my corporate job, or I was like, I'm going to start making moves to leave my corporate job because I just could not handle the grief that I was feeling. And I didn't even know that it was grief at the time. Like I started having all of these physical issues, like a lot of nervous system problems. I was waking up and not able to work. I'd wake up feeling okay, and then it would be 10 o'clock, and I was like, I'm done for the day. It just completely drained me. And I I felt that it was burnout, but now I know it was really probably a lot more because of dad's sickness than even my work. So about um, 6 months before he passed, I decided I was going to leave my corporate job. And the day that I left my corporate job, my stepmom called me and said, "Hey, like you need to come home. Um, it's, not looking good." And he ended up passing 5 days after I left my corporate job, which was not expected. Like I knew that he was going to pass in the next probably 6 months to a year, but I thought I had more time. That was very unexpected. I definitely thought I was going to leave my corporate job, like hit the ground running with my new business, and grief just hit me, and it really stopped me in my tracks, and I wasn't able to start doing what I wanted to do with my career until probably honestly 6 months later, maybe not quite that long. I was able to work, but in spurts. So I think for me, like this whole journey has just been just, people talk about grief, but I never realized how debilitating it is. And I never realized how debilitating anticipatory grief is. There's so many people that are dealing with sick parents or loved ones and trying to operate through their day. And my experience was that it's almost impossible to do that when all you can think about is like, what's it going to feel like when my loved one passes? I mean, I feel like that was like a really consuming thought that I had. Like, what are we going to do after? And just feeling like you can't make any plans and feeling like you kind of can't enjoy life or like move forward with life because you're sort of waiting to see what happens with your loved one.
You hit on a lot of good topics there, and I wanted to share. I don't try to take away from stories on the show typically, but the story you just shared aligns with exactly what I went through when I lost my grandfather with cancer. The similarities are very eerie to me in that aspect. But you talked about leaving your job. I was working my job and got that same phone call like, you need to come home. This is not looking good. And I like you probably didn't really have that experience with loss and death at that point. And I had that same thing happen. I came home to see my grandfather had been fighting cancer for 3 years. He died 2 days after I got home. And I don't think people that have not experienced that understand the gravity of that hitting you so fast. Because like you and I talked about a bit when we first met, grief is when you're dealing with cancer in particular, and especially an aggressive cancer like mesothelioma and my grandfather's blood cancer, they're very aggressive. They don't go away. You're in this weird place of how much time do I have with them, and what's my life going to look like after this happens? And am I ready for this? Can I handle this? You have all these very heavy emotions that come to the table, and they all come together at once. It's not like the best way I can say it is like if you're, planning for a trip to Europe or something, you've got time to plan it. You've got time to say this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do. But when it comes to these situations, it, that anticipatory grief, it weighs really heavy, and it's hard to. You're kind of sitting there going, I'm supposed to work, I'm supposed to do this, my life is supposed to be, and there's always this thing kind of holding you back from doing that. And it's kind of a very, it's hard. I've been having a hard time putting in words from my own experience, but I'll just say that, you're right. It really becomes a roadblock in life of I just can't move forward right now because this is what is important to me and this is what I value the most. And it's a very hard thing to handle. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that process when you were going through that. If you could share with people who may not have experienced this yet, what was that like for you in that moment of just trying to prepare for this as best you could, and then also trying to come to the realization of what was going to happen?
Yeah. So I think, and I'll say, I think one of the really hard things for me with anticipatory grief was I don't think the time that I had with my father from diagnosis to the time of his passing was really what I wanted it to be. And so I think, the biggest feeling I had as soon as dad was diagnosed was, you know, I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. And I realized very quickly how much my job did not matter. I was working for a big tech company and I was supporting large pharmaceutical companies. And I remember being in the hospital and like being on the phone, like talking about these pharmaceutical companies. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this right now. Like, just the irony of it. I'm sitting here trying to support these big pharmaceutical companies and like make sure they're profitable. And my father is dying in the hospital. Um, so that was really, for me, it was about I stepped away from work, really. I mean, I still stayed with my job for a year after that, but maybe a little bit more than a year, maybe about a year. Yeah, about a year and a half. But for me, it was really prioritizing what mattered to me, which was my family, it was my relationship, it was my father. And I definitely tried to fix my dad as a holistic health practitioner. I went in as soon as he was diagnosed and I threw away like everything in their house and their fridge that was anywhere toxic. I went to the store, spent like a ton of money on like new groceries. I was like, okay, we're gonna fix this. Because that's who I am. I'm like a fixer. So for me, it was how do I fix this situation? I wanted to solve the problem. Even when we found out dad had mesothelioma, like my response was, great, great. We know what it is. Like, let's fix this. Like, we know what it is. Let's figure out how we make him live as long as possible, as well as possible. But I think what I did not anticipate was that like cancer is not just a physical thing, it is very much a mental thing. And his mental well-being when he was diagnosed with cancer was just not good. And I kept trying to schedule time to be with him, but I just, unfortunately, the time that we had together wasn't what I wanted it to be. And I think anybody that is dealing with a parent or a loved one that has cancer, like something that I experienced was that person might not be that person anymore. Not completely. And I have really tried to like search for podcasts and like resources that I felt aligned with my story. Like so many people, when they know that a person they love is going to pass, they talk about how you enjoyed your time before they passed and how you talked about certain things and were able to sort of smooth certain things over, but we didn't have that. So like I really wish that my father's cancer journey would have been different. Like I don't even know how else to say it. That part was really hard for me because I was trying to make memories with the time that we had left, and some people are just not in a place where they they are mentally well when they're ill, which I mean kind of makes sense. Like how can you be mentally well and emotionally well when you know you're dying? Um, and
Yeah.
there was so many positive things that had just happened for him. He had just retired, his first grandchild had just been born, so he was really angry. And so a lot of what I tried to do was spend time with him, be what he needed, not what I wanted to be, which was kind of his doctor. Um, I was trying to control and like, control his cancer a little bit and control his healing. And I just found out like you can't do that. You cannot control it. You cannot control how a person handles dying. And
Yeah.
you just have to be there and love them and support them.
I think, I'm going to share with you since you brought that up. And this was one of the hardest things I heard after I lost my grandfather. I was actually very angry when I heard this, but it made a lot of sense when I started to heal from things. Is that, you brought up that his sickness was his space and his decisions early on in this podcast episode. And that's something I struggled with too on my journey through cancer. And you said it very well because I know that. I spent time at the Seattle Cancer Ward with my grandfather talking to people that had terminal cancer. And I was always very scared to talk to them. I wasn't sure what to say because there's nothing I can say that's going to change the circumstance. That it is what it is. And I was amazed how many people, there were some people that could care less. They were just living their life. I remember one guy said, I've racked up $1 million in medical debt. I don't even care. I'm living. I'm going to die soon. I don't care. And he was Mr. Free Will. I also saw other people that it hit them very, very hard, like what it sounds like your dad went through. What I got told that made me so upset when I lost my grandfather, and I had a coach tell me this, but it made sense, is that his dying and his cancer was his experience. It's not yours. And so the suffering that you take on, the feelings you have, that's you. That's you. You're trying to take on someone's experience and make it your own. And I remember getting so enraged when I heard that. I got just morbidly upset. But I knew at the end of the day that was right. It wasn't my experience. It wasn't my life. It wasn't my journey. It wasn't my path. I was really sad and suffering. I was making myself suffer because of how much I loved that person and how much I knew that this person's not going to be in my life much longer. And how do I make the best of that? Like you said, how do I make the best of that? Um, I can share too that, my grandfather got cancer. He changed mentally. He became a whole different person. And some of that I could tell was somberness. Some of it was, I can't believe this happened, shock of facing that mortality. We all are going to die one day. Um, I think, I can't speak to it because I haven't had cancer and I know you haven't. And it's hard to say like what goes on in that mind when you find out something like that. How do you even process that? How does it even make sense? And how do you say, I don't know how long I'm going to be here now, but my time just got cut short. So what do I do with this? It's a very hard place, as you and I have experienced. It's a hard place to be not only a caregiver to people in that space, but also how do we make that experience as much of what we want? And it's a very hard balance between that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. I mean, and I think that's probably the hardest part of anticipatory grief, or at least it was for me. Just, I think I was trying to get inside of his mind a little bit and trying to like understand what he was feeling. And yeah, sometimes I was like, maybe this would have been easier if it had been something that was quick and something that he hadn't known was coming. Cause like I just hated that he was mentally having to go through that. And that was the most heartbreaking and hardest thing for me. Um, was just knowing that he was suffering. That was very, very difficult.
So tell me a little bit about, after your father passed, because I know anticipatory grief was really hard, and I share that with you. It's this very unknown, uncertain thing. We don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. We're like up here feels like a 1,000 mile an hour car just running constant without taking any breaks. When your father passed, did you feel a release of some of that? Did you feel intensity of some of those emotions? Did it kind of feel like things, in a sense, got a little bit easier? Did it get a little bit harder? What was that process like for you after he
Yeah.
passed?
I don't want to say I wouldn't say it's been easier. It's been different. Like the things I am upset about and worry about are different. I remember reading something and it was basically along the lines of like once a person passes, you forget all of the things that bothered you. Like you kind of
Mm.
almost like put this person on a pedestal, and like that's definitely true, or at least it has been true for me. Although I've definitely had some anger sprinkled in. So I would say, I was there. Me and my brother, my sister, my stepmom were all there when he passed, which I'm very thankful for. Being the person that I am and like I don't want to say position in our family, but like I don't know how else to say it.
Mhm.
My immediate reaction was like to jump into action. Be like, all right, I need to call everybody. I have to be the organizer. So I think it took probably a day or so for it to really hit me, like what was happening. And a feeling that I have had throughout this whole year, because I mean, this is new to me. I'm only like a year into my grief, is I wish I could stay in that week that he died. Like, I wish I could stay in that time. And my stepmom will say the same thing. There's just some sort of safety in that space when you're all at home, like all together, even if something horrible has happened, like you're surrounded in this safe bubble. And like there's been so many times where I've wanted to be back in that time of right when he passed or just the few days after he passed. So that has been like a reoccurring theme for me. I feel that, you know, grief was nothing like what I expected. The heartbreak that I've expected in life has been like a guy that I was in love with breaking up with me. Like I thought that that's kind of what grief would feel like. I thought it was gonna be like a sharp pain up front, and then it was just kind of like gonna like slowly get better and better. But that's not been my grief experience. It's been really probably the opposite. I mean, obviously, like, I think it's really, really difficult for the first probably like 2 weeks after somebody passes. But then I felt pretty good actually. And I think that was just my body like trying to um, protect me. So grief for me didn't really get difficult, I feel like, until probably 3 months into the grief process. And it's definitely been a lot of roller coasters of emotions. Like I've experienced a lot of anger towards my dad, a lot of anger that he didn't try harder or, do the things that I wanted him to do to live. Um, a lot of just sadness that he won't see his grandchildren grow up. So like the primary emotion that I have felt throughout my grief journey has been like anger, which is which is kind of surprising. I thought I would just be sad. And it's really draining physically to be grieving. Like I said, I left my corporate job the last day of my corporate job. That was when, I found out my dad was going to pass and did end up passing. So I've been trying to build a business as I've been experiencing grief. And I think that there are pros and cons to that. I am just shocked that my family has been able to work because I know for those first probably 5 to 6 months, it was really hard to have energy. That's been
Mhm.
something that has probably been one of the biggest surprises for me is how low my energy is. And even now, I have days where I feel like I can only give so much. Um, Definitely haven't been able to show up socially. This has very much changed my relationships with my friends who have not experienced something like this and don't really know how to be friends to me in this time. That's not their fault, but people don't really know how to handle or speak to somebody that is going through heavy grief. So it's been a very lonely experience. Thankfully, my partner is super, super supportive and has been just like absolutely perfect. But yeah, so I'd say like primary things to kind of summarize that I've been feeling is a lot of anger, a lot of loneliness, because I do believe grief really changes every relationship that you have. I think it has
Yeah.
truly strained every close relationship that I have. And I've had to really fight to make sure the relationships that I want to stay intact stay intact. And I've lost friends kind of because of that, or drifted away from friends because of that. And yeah, it really sucks your energy.
Yeah, grief is, a lot of people have this misconception that grief is linear. They think that, once you go through a loss, you'll have 2 weeks or a month, you'll feel kind of off, and then it's fine, back to work, back to normal. Like,
Yeah.
and I experienced that with my family. I watched my grandfather die in my arms. I was there the moment he passed. It was the most triggering thing I've watched, aside from losing my son. But I'll just say that I watched my own family 2 days after that just went on with life like it didn't happen. And I didn't eat for 3 days. I didn't sleep well for a week at least. I was messed up from it. I'll openly say it. Something that you brought up that I did want to touch on because it comes up in grief a lot. You brought up a lot of good topics in the last 5 minutes. Um, Anger is a very common thing in grief. And one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is I'm glad you brought up anger, saying I'm angry at my dad. I was angry at my grandfather at times because he didn't drink water. The man hated water. He didn't want to change eating different foods. The man was set in his ways, and I knew at the end of the day that was going to tip it over the edge, and it did. And it's hard to you get a lot of anger sometimes, and that anger, by the way, we have like a negative connotation in society about it. When you go through grief, that anger is actually the part of you that loves you the most. That thing inside you with anger, when you say I'm angry at my dad, what you're really saying is I love him so much that I'm upset by certain things. My love and kindness, compassion, anger is just the part of you that screams to be heard and seen and understood and just comforted. That's what anger really means. It's not a bad thing. And I'm trying to normalize that in the grief process for people that anger is a big part of it. Don't hold yourself back because you feel angry. You got to listen to that anger. Got to give it space. It's not the thing that's holding you back. It's the thing trying to point you in the right direction to say, you need to feel your emotions and feel your feelings. I have this phrase in coaching: when you feel, you start to heal. I don't care if it's angry or sad or whatever. You got to feel it, man. Give yourself space to feel that because that's where you can start to heal a lot of yourself. Touched on a lot of good topics there. I was trying to remember them all, but anger was the big one. I think too that you brought up how there you were evaluating connections and friendships in your life. That's another big one that people don't understand through the grief process. I can say I cut out a lot of people out of my life when I went through grief, and in the moment, it was kind of a visceral, it was kind of harsh, but I learned how many people were really supposed to be in my life and ones that weren't. And it doesn't mean they're bad people, by the way. It doesn't mean that, but it means that those people were not safe for me to talk to. They were not supposed to be part of my journey, and that's okay. I like to use that phrase in coaching all the time. That's okay. Um, when you really evaluate those people you do want in your life, it almost shows you when you go through grief. These are my tried and true. I'm a 90s child, so I'll just say ride and die people um, that are going to be with me through thick and thin. These are the people that are there for me in the worst moments of my life. And they still support me. They still love me. They show kindness. They try to help get me out of my funk in the right way, not the bad way. And those are people I can trust. And so you really redefine your social sphere, even your family. I had family attack me when I lost my grandfather that I hadn't even talked to in 5 years. I got viscerally attacked by them. And I sat there and it took me a long time to get to that place, but I just said, you're upset about losing him just like me, but you're taking it out on me and it's not my thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I haven't talked to those people since. The other part of grief too that you brought up that's really powerful is that grief is very isolating. A lot of people don't understand this, but um, grief is an isolating journey because of what we just discussed. You start finding out there's people in your life that just aren't meant to be on your path, and so you start losing people. You also start finding out the people that are there for you is a very small portion of your friends. And they might oftentimes, by the way, be the one person you never thought was going to be that person for you, and you find out that's who. Um, so, the other part about grief being isolating is that grief is very individual. I had to learn that the hard way when I lost my child that I didn't have anybody to talk to. I really didn't, other than my wife, and I had to help her go through her trauma and grief, and she went through the brunt of it. Um, and so I learned how isolating that journey can be, and that's why it's so important to have people that support you in your life. The people that say insensitive things or tell you to move forward or say grief is just a part of life, you got to get over it. Those are not safe people to be around, and they will actually set you back on your healing journey, believe it or not, more than you can believe. So I always share this too, that when grief is isolating, something to acknowledge about your journey is that it's very individual. It's very, very personal. Um, I'm a grief coach. I don't tell people how to grieve. I don't tell people how to heal. Grievers don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be told what to do. My only thing I can do is I can try to help guide you. I can be a listening ear, listening heart, as one of my previous guests said. And the purpose of why I created this podcast, the Empower Grief Journey, is to have people like you, Madison, come on here and say, this is my grief journey. This is my story. This is how I'm navigating this thing right now. Because there's somebody out there that is going through this alone, just like you did. There's somebody else that feels isolated, just like you. And maybe they hear your story and say, you know what, I got one or two things I took away from this episode. I feel a little more empowered to navigate this grief journey. And they're going to figure it out themselves. And I think that's really the purpose of our grief journey, as I've found out, is to give back to other people who are going to experience this, and going through it, so that we can help contribute to a better way of healing and a better way of processing our grief.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something that you said there kind of reminded me of probably one of actually the biggest things when we talk about cutting people out. I think you and I sort of touched on this when we talked earlier, but grief brought up a lot of old grief for me that I didn't even realize was grief. Um, and one of those things was my relationship with my mom. Talking about people that you're going to cut out of your life, you don't think it's going to be your mother. Um, my mom has not really been there for me and my siblings for the large part of our life, at least not in a positive way. And while my dad was sick, I think I thought a lot about, when dad passes, what will that change for my relationship with my mom? Will I want her in my life more? And it has been wild to me how much I don't want her in my life. And, you know, that's probably not something that everybody, I mean, I hope it's not something that everybody else is experiencing. I think it's a unique situation that I'm in, but I know I'm not the only one. Um, my father was my primary parent, my father and my stepmom, and my mom is not. And she's not been a good influence in my life. Um, so when we talk about cutting people out, I think grief has really opened up my eyes to a lot of things. It's been such a learning journey. Um, it stirred up so many things that I thought I had overcome. I thought I had gotten past my issues with my mom. I thought I had healed my avoidant attachment style. Um, but those things reared their ugly heads, and it's been interesting how much I've had to it really shows you who is there for you and who's not. And unfortunately for me, it's meant um, having to put up a lot of boundaries with my mom, which is probably something I needed to do a really long time ago. So that can seem like a negative thing, I guess, but I think it's actually been a positive thing that's come out of grief, putting up boundaries and removing people from your life that don't deserve to be in it.
Well, like, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a sensitive topic with people nowadays, a big one. And I just want to share that I just want to say I really appreciate your vulnerability and ability to talk about that because that is a topic that should be discussed, should be elaborated on, should become more of a normal topic to talk about. Um, it's hard when it's a parent. I've my wife and I went through that with her mom when we lost our child. Her mom is very narcissistic in a lot of ways, and it was very destructive. And I think that a lot of people, when they hear the term cutting people out of their life, they get this like, whoa, 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 that's really negative. Like, how can you do that? You just have to, it's family. You just have to do that. That's just what we
Yeah.
do. And it's really sets the tone of creating excuses for, lack of better term, emotional and verbal abusive behavior. And a lot of people don't understand that when I try to say this in a nice way when I'm in coaching space, but I'll say it because we're on the podcast. You get what you tolerate and allow in life. And I know that sounds very harsh when I say that, but it's the reality of things because if we continue to and allow emotional and verbally abusive behavior, or behavior that is not safe for us, what happens is over time, I don't know if I can do this on the video, but emotions when they're this big are easy to deal with because it's a very small thing. We can make choices really easy. Over time, when it gets this big out here, very hard to deal with. And that's something I'm glad you touched on is that I should have set boundaries a long time ago. I'll share with people listening to this podcast what Madison just brought up about that story is very, very powerful. And I want to remind you guys to rewind a little bit and re-listen to that because what she said is very golden. Um, when we tolerate and allow these behaviors to happen in our life, we subconsciously tolerate and allow it, but deep underneath us, it's a festering bomb that's going to go off. And one day it's going to take something like losing a parent, cancer coming on, moving, a job change, a job loss, something like that where 20 years of something is going to come out and it's going to be ugly. And that's where, I'm really glad you brought that up because we don't always suspect we're going to have that issue with a family member. We're used to it with friends, we're used to it with coworkers, colleague, we're used to that. That's easy. But when it becomes a family member, that gets really tricky because of that stigma of, well, we're family, this is just what we do. Um, that's really harmful in a lot of ways. And so I always want to encourage that setting boundaries is an excellent way to help protect yourself. And that doesn't mean that you're a mean, bad person for setting boundaries. It doesn't mean you're a bad person for cutting people out of your life. It also doesn't mean you have to have anger towards those people, by the way. You can feel angry. That's okay. Everybody feels angry, especially in the circumstances, but you don't have to be angry. It's really making a personal choice for you to say, this is my life. This is how I want things to be. This is what I'll allow. This is what I'll tolerate. When it crosses that boundary, it's not okay. And a lot of people have that feeling inside, as I'm sure you got on that healing journey. There's a feeling that comes up right through the chest when something's off. And when someone crosses your boundary, you'll feel it. And so a lot of times you gotta, and your conscious mind will always try to talk you out of it because your conscious mind is saying, but it's my mom, but it's this. Well, you only have one parent. Oh, well, it'll make excuses all the time. But if you listen to that, you will always end up tolerating and allowing that behavior that ultimately bucks who you are and puts you in that bad place of tolerating and allowing things that go against you. So I'm just really grateful you shared that today. That was very brave, and I appreciate that because that's a big message that needs to be shared in the grief space.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that what you just said about like that feeling that kind of comes up here, that's exactly it. You know, every time it's so funny the timing of this. I haven't heard from my mom in a long time, and she texted me right before this podcast, and I
Oh,
had
wow.
that feeling come up. I mean, yeah, I saw that text and I was like, oh gosh, this is not going to put me in the right mindset for this. Um, but yeah, it's that feeling, that like, feeling, and I've gotten that for so long. So long, 15 years now, more. And yeah, it really took my dad passing for me to be like, yeah, people could say I only have one parent left. And like I have a lot of people say that. It is kind of wild how many people want to give you their opinion on how you should handle your parents, especially like family members, especially after dad passing, people really pushing me to mend that relationship. But this has been a gift in a way, truly, which really sounds so harsh, but I'm just being really honest. Um, Yeah, that has been a positive thing on my healing journey. You don't have to deal with this anymore. This person did not show up for you for a long time, and they certainly did not show up for you during the hardest time of your life.
Yeah.
So this is the permission you've been looking for. Like this, like, you've been waiting for this person to really push you over. Um, and they've finally done it. So like take that, listen to that, like um listen to that feeling that you're getting. And yeah, I think that's been a positive thing that I've experienced with grief. Even though it's also hard, it has helped me put up a boundary and have respect for myself in an area that I did not before.
Well, I think the hard part, that a lot of people struggle with in that space is that they don't want to accept it for what it is. And that's another thing I teach in my coaching practice is that acceptance doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean we agree to it. It doesn't mean any of those things, but it means we accept the information for what it is, not what we think it is. And that's where, when you do have those interpersonal conflicts, in those situations, when you say, I feel harsh for setting a boundary, I feel harsh for cutting somebody out, you don't really feel those things. What you feel underneath that is you're stepping into your power, you're stepping into yourself. And it's uncomfortable, by the way, because you have sacrificed that for a long time. I've talked to people that have given that up for 25, 30 years. And when I get them to see that, it's uncomfortable. It almost gives you this like ick feeling inside. You're going, that feeling that you're having, that's meeting your true self, your authentic self. That's the person inside here that you're peeling back the layers of the onion to uncover who is Maddison. What does Maddison tolerate and allow? What does Maddison want? When you start peeling those layers back, it gets a little messy and it gets really uncomfortable. I've told people that a lot of times you'll have anxiety, you'll have panic attacks, you'll have all these symptoms come out of that. But the reality is, though, is that's not you. That's you shedding the trauma. That's you shedding what you tolerated and allowed. That's meeting yourself fully and giving yourself permission to be in that space. And that's where, a lot of people talk about power in life. And I said, that's actual power to meet your true self, to know who you are at a core and not get shaken by outside influence. That's actual power in your life. And that's really, it's a beautiful thing because you will run across situations like that in the future. And instead of getting that knee-jerk, angry reaction that you used to have, it will come in the place of a calm sense of this little slight feeling coming up. And you're going to go, oh, hi, I know you. Like, no, we don't need to do that. And that acknowledgement you give yourself is such a powerful moment when you change your way of life from reacting to things to responding. And that's a big chasm. I think a big topic that comes up in the grief space a lot is forgiveness. You talked about being, pushed to mend that relationship, and I've been in that space a lot, and I've heard people all the time say, you should forgive such and such and mend this. I had a guest I talked to last month told me, I was actually shocked when I heard this because it was the first time I've heard it. He said, "Don't you find it funny that the people that ask for forgiveness the most are the ones that contribute the abuse?" And I said, "That is a powerful statement, my friend." I said, "I've never thought about that before." And so something that I've found really helpful on my healing journey, and I wanted to share it because you kind of set it up really well with what you were saying today. I always encourage people stop forgiving other people up front. Just stop doing that because what that's doing is taking the focus off of you a lot and well, not giving yourself space to heal. And something that I think is really powerful for people, because this is going to buck the societal stereotype around forgiveness, is start forgiving yourself. Just look at yourself for a minute. You're important. You have feelings, you have emotions, you have experiences. You deserve to have compassion towards yourself. And so I've gotten to a place in my own personal life, I'll share really quickly. I sat with self-forgiveness one day. I wrote down on a pen and paper one day. I just labeled it self-forgiveness. And I sat there with myself and said, what did I tolerate and allow? What kind of beliefs and constructs do I have that were pushed on me, not my own, but I was told to do, told how to act and think and feel. And I started writing those things down. I felt the anger come up. I felt it just rise. And that was a good place, by the way, because I started noticing as I was going through this exercise of self-forgiveness, what I was really bothering me about. And then I found out through that, I said, I need to forgive myself for what I tolerated and allowed. And then I started looking at these situations I was in with certain individuals, and I started realizing my contributions. I was less angry about what they did, and I was less concerned about the actions they had, but I was more concerned about what I did, what I tolerated, what I allowed. And I started saying to myself, and I want to share this with the listeners today, substitute your name into this, but I started to say, Chris, I forgive myself for participating in that. I knew that wasn't a safe place for me. I knew that wasn't the right person to be in front of. I knew that situation wasn't good, and I should have walked away. I should have stepped up and said what I needed to say. I should have had a voice. I should know better than this. I should give myself space and opportunity to change how I interact and engage with relationships when I see that situation again. And when I started giving myself that permission, that forgiveness, that thing just started calming down real fast. And that's where, I started this by saying, stop worrying about forgiving other people, forgive yourself. Again, focus on what you can control. Focus there. Now, if that brings you, by the way, to a place where you can forgive other people in whatever way that looks like for you, awesome. But I always want to encourage, like Madison talked about today, going through that process of your own grief, going through that stage of recognizing what you've allowed and tolerated, using boundaries, getting rid of people in your life that may not be a good fit to be on your journey, that is an okay thing to do. That is not a radical thing. That is a okay thing to do because that's part of your healing process that you need to take. And again, nobody should be telling you how to grieve. No one should be telling you how to heal. Nobody should be telling you how to forgive or what to forgive. That shouldn't happen. You've got to do those things yourself. And whether that's a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, that's completely up to you as a person. It's not for other people to tell you. So I appreciate you sharing your story today.
No,
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm like, I need to do this exercise about forgiving myself for things. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, I know you're a year into your grief journey, so you're pretty, I consider it still fresh because I was there too, by the way, multiple times. And I still think a year in is really early in the process. How has your grief journey shaped you in a lot of ways as far as who you are today versus where you were a year ago?
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Before, like I've read some, I did a lot of reading on grief and stuff, and I remember hearing people say like it took me 2 years or, X long, and I was like, oh, it won't take me that long. Newly into it, I was like, surely I will, be in a good place. But it takes a really long time. Actually, this Thursday is the 1 year anniversary of my dad passing. So going through a lot of the emotions this week, doing like a lot of reliving, I'd say, like reliving those like past or last days. Um, you talked a lot about authenticity and like finding your real self, and that has been so big for me. Um, I feel like this whole year and my entire grief journey has been about me finding my authenticity and really changing who I am as a person. And I think the timing of me leaving my corporate job and my dad passing were very magical. Like, I think it was a very aligned situation. And it has really shaped how I've built my business Went into, I wanted to go into my business focusing on like gut health and physical health. And after experiencing this year and really diving into like, who am I as a person? You know, what are my subconscious beliefs that hold me back? What are those things that I've been allowing to happen in my life? Those people that I've been allowing in my life that don't deserve it. I've just been doing so much work on that. And it has completely shaped how I want to run my business. It's completely shaped how I approach and think about health. It's completely shaped what I believe being healthy actually means. Um, I was such a physical health first person, and now I am just so convinced that all sickness really comes from a mental place, an emotional place, and not healing from trauma. So this year for me and how grief has changed me is it's helped make me into the person that I actually want to be. And that is not something that I expected at all. I am very much still on that journey, but it's made me have to sit with beliefs that I have or beliefs that are like really ingrained in me that are negative. And I am really having to practice and put an effort into um, overcoming those beliefs and becoming the person that I really want to be. Um, so I think grief has been like it's shaped me in so many ways that I would have not believed. And it kind of makes me think that grief is a like really beautiful thing. Like it's a really, really hard thing. And obviously I wish my father was still here. But I think that you can learn and grow in a really positive way with grief. So I've enjoyed, even though it's been really hard, I've experienced all those physical feelings that you're talking about, like a lot of like nervous system issues, sleepless nights, anxiety, but it's because I am like determined to come out of this better than I went into it. Um, and yeah, I'm like really diving into like, who is Madison? Like, why have I operated in this specific way for so long? And like, how do I want to be moving forward?
Madison, that was really beautifully said. I appreciate you sharing that with listeners today. I think that's really going to help out people that are trying to navigate this grief journey and figure out who they are and figure out what this process means to them. Um, I wanted to ask you as we wrap up a couple questions, is that if you ran into somebody that, just lost their father like last week, or somebody that's going through grief in the very early stages of things, what's one or two things that you would want to share with them if you could talk to them today?
Yeah. I would tell them to be gentle with themselves. Um, I would tell them, and I think I wish I could tell my family this because they're handling grief in a very different way than me. Like, let your grief happen. Like, let yourself mourn and let yourself grieve. Like, I schedule time to cry every week. Like, I schedule time to be upset. And I really think that that's important. Um, Honestly, I had a friend whose father passed, and I don't really even know I just went through it. Like, I don't feel like I know exactly what to say to him, but things that helped me were actually letting myself be upset and letting myself mourn and actually scheduling time to mourn because if you do not, it will come up. Like I knew when I didn't do it, I'd wake up and be upset for no reason. I'd be mad at my partner for no reason. And it was because I just had not scheduled time to cry and be mad and be upset.
I think that's really powerful, what you just said there, because that's a lot of people try to bury that grief and try to just move on with the motions of life. And I will say there's times that our subconscious mind will push that down and suppress it because it's so painful and we just aren't in a place where we can handle it yet. But if you're doing that every day going through grief, it's gonna rear its ugly head. And that's gonna come out, like you said, being angry at your partner for no reason that day.
Yeah.
Um, so I really appreciate you saying that, to give yourself space and give yourself time to grieve and mourn, feel those emotions, feel those feelings, allow yourself space to process that. I think that's huge. Um, my last question I have for you, if people want to get in touch with you online, and follow you, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can either find me on Instagram at Well with Madison or go to my website, which is also wellwithmadison.com.
Awesome. Well, Madison, I just want to say I want to thank you for being on the show today. This has been an awesome episode of the Empower Grief Journey. For our listeners today, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know that could benefit from listening to Madison's story. Again, this was a very powerful episode today. The Empower Grief Journey is about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want to invite you guys to follow our podcast on Facebook and YouTube, and you can also get in touch with me at empowergriefjourney.com. I want you guys to know that are listening, you're never alone on this journey. Together, we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.